spent 10 years in prison and is also working with the dog. So should be pretty interesting. So today we have Peter Kaufman, and I'm welcome Peter. And he is also a local resident, if some of you don't know that, and he's at the MIT Open Learning and Knowledge Futures, he's with the Knowledge Futures Group. He's a writer, teacher, a documentary producer, and as I said, he lives in Cambridge. I didn't say that part, but he lives in Cambridge and he also lives here. So he really is a neighbor, and I think he's got some pretty interesting and compelling things to talk about today that impact us in the present and going forward. So welcome, Peter.
Thank you, Lawrence, very much for that introduction and for inviting me, and thank all of you for attending and participating. And a big thank you to the Scoville Library. This is a remarkable institution. It's the oldest public library in the country. It's in our town, and as such, one of the great and oldest sanctuaries in America, and it deserves all we can do to support it. So I feel lucky just even today to be able to look inside, Lawrence, because you're there. This is the third book talk that I'm giving, and it's different from the others, in large part because Lawrence gave it such a strong and provocative title. Thank you, Lawrence. Thanks a lot. Thought control, a history. I'll make 5 points. I'll get through them as fast as I can so we can have good time for robust, conversation. The first is the reason why I'm giving this talk today, apart from the fact that I want to promote this book, The New Enlightenment and the Fight to Free Knowledge, is because we've been damaged. Who's the we? The we is everyone in our country, also the world, by systems that suppress freedom of thought and free expression. The health pandemic that we are in today, the economic jobs crisis that we have plunged into, the unhinged political violence we are witnessing are all a direct function, a result of the severe information disorder we find ourselves in today. The fact that lies are everywhere, the big lie about the election, as it's called, the big lie, but also thousands of millions of other lies, big and little, about COVID, about the vaccine, inequality, injustice, you name it. The second point is that this isn't a new situation, our American situation. The information crisis here and in other countries, also big and small, efforts by states, organized religions, political parties, cults. Sometimes political parties and cults are the same thing. Media organizations, private companies, public institutions, even public institutions, all of these efforts to try to control other people's minds, to try to control freedom of expression, freedom of thought, have been around for centuries. But to Lawrence's particular challenge, about the history of thought control, the Russians really hit it out of the park. And there's a whole section in this book, a whole chapter about that. Russians, are, of course, are bastards. I mean, not all Russians. I speak Russian. My father's family was from that part of the world. Tolstoy was pretty cool. Some of you guys might be part Russian, I don't know. But the Soviet Russians were bastards, a lot of them anyway. And they were amazing at this business of thought control. They designed a totalitarian system of it that stretched over 11 time zones. We are a big country over here. We have 4 of those. So maybe if you include Central and Eastern Europe, over 14 time zones that stretch from the German Democratic Republic, the westernmost part of that, to the Kamchatka Peninsula on the Pacific. And it wasn't a system that any of us who pay attention really would find that alien. In what was called the East Bloc, you have this from the great writer Stefan Kisielewski, writing in 1979, so, high Cold War in Warsaw. Reading our press, he goes, an activity to which I devote myself with an absurd masochistic thoroughness. Does that sound like familiar? Fills me with rage. I am sometimes even ashamed. 1979, Warsaw. I am sometimes even ashamed at the empty blather of our ruling dignitaries. I fly into a fury at the hired lapdogs in the press who simply follow orders. My hatred, he goes, my hatred stems from the conviction that every part of the apparatus together all amount to a great triumph of Moranism. That's the title he gives this article, the GTM, the Great Triumph of Moranism, whose goal is to break people of the habit of thinking clearly. Censorship, he goes on, is their primary instrument, and it keeps careful watch to make sure people lose their memory and their ability to connect causes with effects. But the Soviet Russians went way beyond censorship. They took their lessons from Marx and Engels to heart. I don't know how many Scoville Library talks involve Marx and Engels, actually, like a lot of black bears, woodpeckers. Marx and Engels got them, they took their lessons from Marx and Engels to heart. They confiscated all the means of media production. And they brought all media equipment and materials under state control. Printing and publishing, broadcasting, everything was made a state monopoly industry. In Romania, you could not own a private typewriter, Xerox paper, or a mimeograph machine. They limited every publisher and broadcaster's physical access to outside, more truthful information. They took over the distribution of all media. They locked the access of publishers and broadcasters to foreign sources and vice versa, locked them out. And they put control of every publisher and broadcaster's finances under the state. These Soviet Russians really put the total in totalitarianism. They nailed it. And how did people deal with that system of lies? Lies that were pumped into their eyes and ears all day and all night long. How did people defeat such a system? That's an even better question. One way they dealt with it was to, silence themselves, to pull the Oprah. I do not recommend that. Another way was to just quit, maybe to leave the country, to publish abroad, like Kisielewski did in Poland. He published in Paris emigre journals. But another way, and the way that won the day, was to do something, to create publishing and knowledge networks, truth networks of their own, sort of anti-establishment collectives. They knew that truth could and would eventually destroy and overthrow such a system. Samizdat, from the Russian to self, sam, publish, zdat, is credited for helping to end totalitarian thought control in Central and Eastern Europe and the former Soviet Union. And I'll read a passage from this book. Bringing freer expression and more democratic institutions to hundreds of millions of people. With typewriters, carbon paper, and the copy machine, dissident writers and thinkers in the East Bloc created a parallel communications culture, even a parallel political culture, and they managed to outflank official media and its state-controlled messages. The ideas shared across Samizdat's so-called second society or second culture became the backbone of the human rights movement and freedom and free expression. Future Nobel Prize laureates Boris Pasternak, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, and Andrei Sakharov, among others, first published much of their work this way as did world leaders, including Václav Havel and Lech Wałęsa, who emerged from the underground dissident movement also. Indeed, Solzhenitsyn, Havel, and others maintain that the liberation of the Soviet Union and the East Bloc would not have happened without it. Havel, who was really one of the great dissident leaders in this system, spoke in terms that we would understand today dealing with COVID. He knew the stakes. And, during this time, the same time around that Kisielewski was writing, mid-1970s, he would write a brave open letter to, the General Secretary of Czechoslovakia, the Communist Party there, Hušák, where he explained it. He goes, another passage, this is Havel writing, the forcible liquidation of a journal, a theoretical review concerned with the theater, say, is not just an impoverishment of its particular readers. It is not merely even a severe blow to theatrical culture. It is simultaneously and above all the liquidation of a particular organ, and he gets into biology a little, of society's self-awareness, and hence an interference hard to describe in exact terms in the complex system of circulation, exchange, and conversion of nutrients that maintain life in that many-layered organism, which is society today. A blow against the natural dynamic of the processes going on within that organism, a disturbance of the balanced interplay of all its various functions, an interplay reflecting the level of complexity reached by society's anatomy. And just as a chronic deficiency of a given vitamin, Havel goes on, amounting in quantitative terms only to a negligible fraction of the human diet, can make a man ill, so in the long run, the loss of a single periodical can cause the social organism much more damage than would appear at first sight. So I'd like us to remember that this system was overthrown. And part of the reason it was overthrown is because Havel recognized what he was dealing with. He wrote of truth as a virus, something that can, quote, slowly spread through the tissue of the life of lies, gradually causing it to disintegrate. The crust presented by the life of lies is made of strange stuff, he goes. As long as it seals off hermetically the entire society, it appears to be made of stone. But the moment someone breaks through in one place, when one person cries out, "The emperor is naked," when a single person breaks the rules of the game, thus exposing it as a game, everything suddenly appears in another light. And the whole crust seems then to be made of a tissue on the point of tearing and disintegrating uncontrollably. Havel wrote of truth as a bacteriological weapon that a single civilian can use to disarm an entire division. There's more about that in here. But I'd like us to remember that this system was overthrown by collective action and people taking control of their own media and overwhelming false media and with information that was true. The third point is that the battle of truth against lies is not new. And it isn't just the provenance of Russian bastards. We have plenty of our own bastards over here too. My book opens with a graphic account of a guy who got burned at the stake for trying to share knowledge. A guy who got strangled. It's the same guy, actually, roped onto a piece of wood, lit on fire, and as he's lit on fire, they come around to strangle him. William Tyndale was his name, and his thing was to translate the Bible so that people could read it and hear it in ways that the apparatus of the church and the apparatus of the crown, and this is in the 1500s, did not want it read and did not want it heard. Worship back then was like television and newspapers and magazines and the web all together. There was nothing else, no other media. It was once a week. And it was like this event today. And that's all you had, God forbid. Like I'd be here, on Zoom, but not on Zoom in a church, and we'd be in together, whatever, up at a pulpit I'd be here and reading stuff to you from, a big book, the Bible, something that looked like this. One book, that was it, once a week. And you could not have your own copy of it back then. You could not buy it. You could not own it, not in the original languages, and especially not in a language like English that you could understand. Another guy in Tyndall's time, in the 1530s, gets burnt at the stake for having the Lord's Prayer in English written on a scrap of paper in his pocket. Anyway, here's where I would be at your one weekly event, reading this, every outside bit of media to you, and I would be lying. Like, I would be saying, making stuff up to give myself more power, more resources. If that's not familiar, given the last 4 years, I don't know, you have to give money to me, for example, I'd say. Otherwise, you won't get to heaven. You have to do this. You have to do penance. When Tyndall knew the actual word in the original was to repent. You have to do that. You have to engage in charity, I would say, from up here. When the original Greek word actually meant you have to love. You would have to confess, which is what the church wanted and wanted to control and what it said. But Tyndale knew that the original was the simpler and more personal word to acknowledge. He knew 7 languages, Tyndale. This is the first chapter of my book. Greek, Latin, Hebrew, Aramaic, as people do. And he's completely devout by all accounts. When he's in jail, he converts his jailer and his jailer's family. Anyway, this nonsense that I'd be reading to you from as he'd be sitting there, like Kisielewski in Poland centuries later, this system, he would have none of it. So he wades through the Bible from Genesis 1 through Revelation 22, not only owning it on pain of death, translating the thing on pain of death, but printing and distributing it on pain of death again, working with all the publishing technologies of his day, connecting with book designers, paper suppliers, printers. The industry was new, by the way. Boat captains, horsemen across 16th century Europe, the YouTubes, websites, and Twitters back then, to bring the knowledge and the book that contained it into the hands of the people. It's an amazing story too. It's kind of a samizdat story as well. And they chased him down and they killed him for it. So this battle of truth versus lies, knowledge against ignorance, is not new. If you're a teacher, an author, a publisher today, a bookseller, a filmmaker, a writer, librarian, a reader, you're involved in it. But if you start going on too much about the wrong kind of things, publishing video or saying stuff that our military, shoots down, burns civilians in our name, or, you start documenting that the Democratic National Committee is shot through corrupt, or you start proving that our governments and communications companies can track and share every move we make, the forces that exist will come for you, just like they came for Tyndall, Kisielewski, like they came for Fred Hampton, if anybody's seen that recent film. They will track you down. They will drive you into exile or madness or prison or worse. The fourth point is, it wasn't meant to be this way. Book publishing, the printed word, radio, the moving image, was meant to be something really glorious. My book goes into the origins of our own hopes for publishing, in particular, the original Enlightenment. The Republic of Letters is what they called it back then, but also of radio, of film, television, online learning. Read some of the manifestos that are in here and quoted in here. There are 2 chapters of about the history of the origins of television, the origins of public broadcasting, that when you read them as if you're watching Fox, totally break your heart. The difference, the delta, as they say, between what was thought of back then and what we have today. And for print, there was no greater offering ever in the history of man, I think, than the encyclopédie that the French Enlightenment philosophers started writing, compiling, and offering to the public in 1750. 22 million words, 72,000 articles, 18,000 pages, 28 volumes. You can access it all in French and English online today for free. But it was an effort to compile all the world's knowledge and pack it into one place so that it could be published, distributed, shared. And the act of doing this was mind-blowing. Not only the act, given, church and state at the time, but also what was inside. They wrote, for example, an article on reason, right? Which was a big part of their whole rational approach to knowledge back then. No proposition can be accepted as divine revelation. That's pretty, gutsy back then. No proposition can be accepted as divine revelation if it contradicts what is known to us, either by immediate intuition, as in the case of self-evident propositions, or by obvious deductions of reasons. It would be ridiculous to give preference to such revelations. They go. The entry for fortune in the Encyclopédie spotlights the gross inequalities of wealth that were already evident in 18th century Europe. Their article on the slave trade, they write in the 1750s, mind you, the purchase of Negroes to reduce them into slavery violates all religion, morals, natural law, and human rights. The encyclopedists announced from day one, and this may be the most important thing, that their giant project would be, as we would say today, fact-based. There would be an underlying and overarching commitment to the verification of all source materials. Verification is a long and painful process, Diderot wrote in his introduction to the whole enterprise, his famous preliminary discourse. We have tried as much as possible to avoid this inconvenience by citing directly in the body of the articles the authors on whose evidence we have relied and by quoting their own text when it is necessary. This, in practice, this was revolutionary. There would be no accepted truths, but for those that could be proven and cited. Not a bad rubric for today, by the way, or not by the way. It's kind of the point of this whole talk. And 23,000 articles in that encyclopedia, 23,000 articles had links to other articles, what librarians like those, working at Scoville would call cross-references. The article on cannibals ended with the mischievous cross-reference, as one historian would later describe it, the mischievous cross-reference, see under Eucharist, communion, altar, etc. So the fifth final point that I have is that what we have today doesn't have to be this way. It's important to read these original manifestos and get fired up by these projects, the Passion of Tyndall, or the whole philosophy of the Encyclopédie and the Enlightenment, and the origins of some other things, including MIT OpenCourseWare, which I work with today, or public broadcasting, which is also an extraordinary resource, but not what it could be and not what it was intended to be. You guys have read about Edward Snowden's revelations. Snowden, by the way, gave a blurb to this book. You've heard of Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning, and over in Russia, Alexei Navalny. He's Russian, but not a bastard. You've heard about surveillance capitalism. You know that we are fed lies by the boatload, surveilled by state and corporate means left and right. And it would be really good, I think, to talk about some of these things in our discussion. But there are opportunities we have for publishing and networking, like the publishing and networking that's described in this book over the 1500s, 1700s, 1900s, 20th, 21st centuries, that are, we have opportunities today that are unprecedented in human history. This technology that we're gathered on today, video, the internet together, for example, With our phones, we have more publishing and networking power than all the Tyndalls and Diderots and dissidents like Solzhenitsyn and Havel and Wałęsa all put together. Everyone has a role that they can play, like supporting libraries like this one, if that's not too self-dealing, or remark today, by supporting, the ACLU, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, the Free Software Foundation, other organizations that promote, preserve, protect our civil rights. Diderot's commitment to reference citation continues in the most important successor project to the Enlightenment's encyclopedia, which is, of course, Wikipedia, founded 20 years ago this year. It's the foundation of what Wikipedia calls verifiability. In many ways, it's the foundation for truth in knowledge and society online today. It's essential. Verifiability, Wikipedia says, means that material added to Wikipedia, this is a quote from their sort of key principles, must have been published previously by a reliable source. Editors may not add their own views to articles simply because they believe them to be correct. And they may not remove sources' views from articles simply because they disagree with them. Verifiability is a necessary condition, a minimum requirement for the inclusion of material, though it's not a sufficient condition. It may not be enough. Wikipedia is, one of the world's most popular websites. It's the world's most popular non-commercial website. And it's an irreplaceable source of verifiable information, open to anyone, everyone, anywhere. The Internet Archive is another one of these that deserves tremendous support. It's working with Wikipedia now. Archive.org is what the Internet Archive is at. Digitizing books so that links to sources in Wikipedia link all the way through to the books themselves. So it's not just a footnote. You can actually go from the Wikipedia article to read the book and render images and text on the cited pages. So in a Wikipedia article on Martin Luther King, for example, another guy who spoke truth to power, the reference link to a biography by Taylor Branch now hot links to the full readable book online. And that work is essential. There's a Princeton historian, Anthony Grafton, who's a historian of, print and media generally. And he writes, only the use of footnotes and the research techniques associated with them makes it possible to resist the efforts of modern governments, tyrannical and democratic alike, to conceal the compromises they have made, the deaths they have caused, the tortures they or their allies have inflicted. And that sort of takes us back to where we started. Can we take verifiability further now, especially as our crisis deepens? Information about vaccines, Trump's family, taxes, whatever, and not just Trump, but all sides of the thing. Can we improve citation for the medium that's beginning to overtake us all, which is video? Can we make resources on the web also a new thing, verifiable? What does citation look like or sound like in a podcast? We have to think about and devote ourselves to these things as, technologists or users bound, in fact, by terms of service agreements, which we all sign when we, do Spotify or Pandora, you name it. And while we do, we have to publish as much material as we can online, everything. We have to, it's our responsibility to, I would say, make real knowledge as viral as lies. We have to fund our archives. Do you know that Google, which seems like a public resource, is part of a privately owned, publicly traded company that keeps information on your searches forever and tracks where you go on other sites after you've left its own? We have to fund our libraries again. And most important, we have to explore and reconstitute the rights we have or had or think we have or should have online into a new kind of social contract. We have to look at our national security agencies more carefully than we have. Google and these sprawling commercial companies like, Facebook, and everyone else. We have to kind of create commissions and study and propose new rules and find a way to get them made into law, all while we are publishing more truthful information with citations that are verified, especially in the non-commercial networks that are owned by nobody but us. We have to do all that so we don't feel like Polish dissidents every morning, full of rage while reading the newspaper. And to top it off, we're reading the newspaper while the newspaper is reading us. So thank you for this opportunity to kick off, I hope, a discussion about some of this stuff.
Well, thank you, Peter. Obviously, you could talk about a lot more aspects. I'm sure some of them are in your book. I just want to read this one as a comment, but it obviously goes easily into a question, agreeing with your points, but the difficult part is changing the minds of those who have been convinced that lies are truths. One thing I'm partly hearing or interpreting from what you said, in a sense, is have the truths overwhelm the lies. But I don't know if those people, the people who are not that interested in truth, how do you get them to listen?
I can take a crack, at answering that question, but it would be fun to turn it into a group discussion. I think it's super hard for people who are completely, lost. In a talk I gave yesterday, the day before, it's hard to remember, pointed out that half the country basically believes that angels are real, and more than half believe that evolution never happened, and it's who knows, actually, maybe they're both right, but it's hard to argue with folks who are cemented in there. But I think what we need to do is recognize this, to your point, Philip, this is a long-term challenge. And if I can't get you, maybe I can get maybe I can get your grandchildren. You're not born a Trump voter. You're not born believing that we were created this way 60,000 years ago, just the way we are now. You're educated, or whatever the opposite of that is, or socialized into that belief system. And, in the same way that it's been decades, centuries even, degrading our ability to realize a kind of really verified, truthful information knowledge network. We have to spend decades reconstituting it and rebuilding it. So I think it's a long-term challenge, but don't give up.
And as I said earlier, people are free to unmute themselves.
Well, I'll make one quick comment, which is nobody thinks that they believe lies. So I think in terms of addressing all the people who we say believe in lies, you can't approach it by telling them you've been lied to. This is the truth, because they're thinking the same thing about you if you're trying to tell them anything different. So I think that's the trick, is finding a way to present facts to somebody in such a way that you aren't telling them that they believe a lie, but you're trying to get them to consider this also while you're thinking what you think.
Yeah, I'm with you. Probably it's that it's turtles all the way down kind of concept, where the universe is built on whatever, a thing on top of a turtle, and what underneath that it's turtles all the way down. If verification is a achievable thing, then at some point, the people who can prove what they're saying should win over the people who cannot. And maybe it's not the generation that today is completely cemented in their belief that, one thing exists, some election was won by somebody else or something. But, over time, if you go, well, where's your proof for that point? And where's your proof for that point? Where's your proof for that point? It's super hard to have, Thanksgiving discussions with people like this, or, dinner table discussions with people like this. But ultimately, if your arsenal is fuller than theirs, I don't know, at least the children that they have that are watching the discussion might be able to drift apart a little bit.
Hi, Peter.
Yeah.
I have a question. Now, is there a truth, absolute truth that everybody agrees on?
Is there an absolute truth that everybody agrees on?
I would like to mention gravity.
Yeah.
I mean, you can prove it. If you don't believe in gravity, somebody jump from the first floor of a house.
It's a great question. And it's kind of it's in part like one of your serves. It's impossible to return, but also it's a softball. It's like a lob because Isaac Newton, who basically, figured some of this stuff out, figured it out during the Enlightenment, published it during the Enlightenment, figured it out while he was home from Cambridge during the plague, actually. So it's totally relevant to what we're talking about. And there's some detailed quotations from that whole set of experiments and observations in this book, and how it relates to a few other things. But I think there's some people who still believe, what is it? The Earth goes around the moon instead of the other way around, or the sun, I think there's some people who, yeah, I mean, there have always been people who challenge Newton or Galileo or Copernicus. A friend from Poland is on this call today. So I have to throw Copernic in there. But yeah, I don't know if there's a single truth that everybody believes.
No, but I'm talking about one undeniable truth, that the consequences of that would be very destructive if you don't believe in it.
I don't know. Do you think there is, or does anyone else? Can I throw it back at you? Can I return it?
I would not want to test it.
You can't live for very long without drinking water.
Okay.
So,
Or breathing.
Well, and that's interesting because those really are biological truths. One might call those facticities. It's pretty hard to contradict those.
Can I ask you, Peter, about bias in Wikipedia?
Yeah.
I mean, you can't look at Wikipedia and accept what you read as truth there. In my experience.
Yeah. There've been professional societies that have gone about testing Wikipedia against Encyclopedia Britannica or against other major reference sources, including many of those that are probably behind warrants right now in the library. And they find that today, the articles are more accurate, more thorough, better referenced than any other source. Now, I can go into Wikipedia right now and I can say, Donald Sosin really cannot play Mozart at all. And that can stand there for a day. And in that day, everybody else on this call can read it and go, well, that's not true, obviously, we know. But, you know, when the system refreshes itself and when the editors get through cleansing it, that false information will no longer stand. So it's a work in progress, but it is. I would submit to you, and you know, I could, you know, I've got the receipts. I could like back that up with the studies and the references. That it's a better resource than just about anything else we have. Now that said, that's part of the problem, right? There is bias in Wikipedia today. A lot of just the bias of what's the thing is constructed of and by. Most of the people are male who are writing for it. Most of them are white. But you know, there's a major effort to free information and put it in there. Museums are uploading images, galleries are uploading images of artwork, wall cards, other things by the thousands now, batch uploading it's called, into Wikipedia, which is outstanding. It makes that thing richer and more robust. And while that's going on, you have these major scientific journals and stuff that charge $5,000 for a library to access them. You know, including journals that are critical for advances in science, you know, medicine, etc. So we have to rethink our whole, you know, the whole balance between what is and is not immediately accessible, and where the gates are, and what is actually factually verifiable.
Peter, speaking of science,
Yeah.
so like I can name 3 books that I think are, you know, in the other directions toward the truth, like Sapiens or Origins or Germs, Guns, and Steel. So is that the corrective? I mean, I'm not saying everything in those books is completely 100% true, but is that the corrective force? Are we going down the rabbit hole of non-truth, or are we coming out of it, would you say? And just to throw out a simple quote by Mark Twain, he says, it's easier to fool people than it is to convince them they've been fooled.
Yeah. Yeah, and he said, or someone else said, it was in that Lakeville Journal conversation I had with Fred, that, you know, a lie can make its way halfway around the world before the truth even gets its boots on. I don't know where we are, damn it. I wish I knew. Like, but I think that we were in a way worse place the moment before, you know, the swearing in of the current administration. That too may be a biased perspective, but I can tell you, we had the most powerful man, most powerful person in the planet, just like an endless, you know, Willy Wonka, like chocolate fountain of horror and lies and nonsense. And that, like, the most powerful person in the, so way more powerful than, you know, Brezhnev was when Solzhenitsyn was there, or, you know, Gierek or Gomulka when these other guys I've been talking about, or Hushak. Like, so I think we are at least coming out of that. I don't know whether we're coming out of the information disorder, but, you know, the destruction that's been built has been horrible. Timothy Garton Ash, who was, you know, unbelievably great journalist, he's around in the UK, wrote of what the communist regimes did to Central and Eastern Europe as akin to taking an aquarium and making fish soup out of it, and then trying to make the aquarium back out of the fish soup, you know? 4 years of this nonsense with Trump, and, you know, all kinds of months and years that preceded it and will follow it. If we're not on our guard, I guarantee you we'll wind up in the soup. You know? Yeah.
There's a couple of questions. Let me at least on the
Yeah.
chat. Let me at least start with one. you say we need to rethink the problem, but who are we? Good question.
Yeah, that is a good question. I would say, people who show up, like the people who showed up today. I mean, I'm going on this whatever, book tour, and I'm speaking to a lot of universities and libraries and museums and archives and public broadcasters along the way. And I would say those are knowledge institutions. Those are where repositories of certified factual information exists, verifiable information. We can, maybe for the benefit of some people who say that there are no single truths, or there aren't, at least the most verified information, let's put it that way, exists. And I think that's a big part of the we. And then other people who care about, education and media and other stuff like that will follow or need to come. I don't know, is that an okay answer? This is from a question, I can see from the Gallups, you guys are related to the polling Gallups issue.
Someone who just unmuted themselves is getting a little reverb, so I don't know, maybe people should keep themselves muted until you're ready to say something. But Peter, so isn't that, can't that be characterized as the, whatever this means, the intelligentsia? And part of my question, we could certainly talk about if people were better educated, et cetera, that might help them in the thinking process, whatever it is. But we also know that there's plenty of very well-educated people who seem to be more than happy to go into these conspiracy theories and all this crazy stuff. So clearly it's not simply an education thing. I mean, it's something about the kinds of education, mindset, I don't know what.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm not 100% sure either why, super smart people are out there saying, super stupid things. And I don't know how to deal with that kind of fundamental derangement. I think there are other, people with medical, degrees who can help us understand that kind of thing. There are lots of people who are out there saying the Holocaust never happened. That's like a historical thing that is unlike gravity or unlike some of the other Newtonian laws of physics that seem to be proven. And those historical things are super hard. Social science facts are super hard because I can hold an apple and drop it, and we can talk about that. But coming up with tangible evidence around the dinner table of Majdanek is a little harder.
Peter, I have a question.
Let me just ask a related question first, Daniel, and then we can move to yours. But
Okay.
so related on whether the Holocaust ever happened is, what's your view on these various alternative websites, Alex Jones and InfoWars, for example?
Not a fan.
Not a what? Oh.
Yeah.
Would you
I mean, should they be shut down?
I didn't know.
That's if that's what you mean, like, that's a good conversation to have. I prefer to focus on the abilities that we might have, the we knowledge institutions, as previously defined, all of us, if we care about this stuff, to overwhelm these counterfactual websites and sources with factual information of our own. the idea that there are millions of journal articles that are inaccessible because of paywalls right now, when we're living in a moment of what the Rand Corporation calls truth decay, is terrible. Like, that's what another figure in this book, got involved in, Aaron Swartz, who's, made a concerted effort to free up all of these historical journal articles and post them on the web so that everybody anywhere forever could read them. He got in a lot of trouble for that, and it did not end well for him. I don't know, but I think we have to talk to these knowledge institutions, to the professional societies, the professions in medicine and health in particular, and try to figure out new ways of sharing that knowledge. Because, maybe it's the case, counterfactualism is a tough thing, but maybe it's the case that 550,000 Americans would not be dead if we had taken a more fact-based, verified, verification-based approach to the plague that's afflicting us now. I bet you there's something to that.
Peter,
Yeah.
I have a question.
Was Daniel, sorry,
Yes.
Daniel was
Yeah,
next.
human mind is not only occupied by questions of facts. There is a huge space dedicated to beliefs. And the question is, how do we deal with a belief? You cannot verify or not verify one. If you cannot convince a Muslim that Muhammad didn't ride to heaven on a winged horse. It is, what do we do with beliefs when we are trying to fight for a universal truth? Is it ever possible?
It's a great question. I mean, a lot of what Tyndall wrote about, and he got into these massive fights in the 1500s with Thomas More and Henry VIII and the popes and stuff, came down around, centering, and he was a devout guy again, came down around centering, activities that you engage in on a daily basis, or, on love, whatever. Not to get all wacky sappy on us, but there's something to this. Like, there's a tremendous space that beliefs occupy in our minds, and should occupy probably, emotions and feelings and faiths and devotion and stuff. So I don't know. I mean, you sound like you've thought about this, Daniel. I would not presume to, I could not presume to answer the question, what do we do about beliefs? But I think we have to make room for beliefs and recognize that beliefs of some kind or another can lead to good things. It is not necessarily evil that a Muslim believes in Muhammad's, horse ride. In fact, it's probably good for Litchfield County. We're horse people over here. Sorry. But it's as real to that person as any beliefs I have had or have been educated to have, exist in my head. We have to make room for that, but we have to make sure that those beliefs, if they include things like, our belief, some beliefs that somebody is, I don't know, evil, every other person's, we need to, who said, like, your right to swing your arm ends where somebody's nose begins? Some great Supreme Court justice. There's something in there.
There's another question. Go ahead if you'd like.
Oh, yes, I do. Peter, another question. Now, I just want to know the acceptance of a fact, or if a denial of a fact is has a financial stake in it. For example, I know that was it Alex Jones would keep on saying, the killing in a Connecticut school never happened, but he has a lot of product produced. And to come out to deny it means that he's going to lose thousands of dollars.
I think totally it does. Not every time and not everywhere, but misinformation is a huge business, and you would be wise to follow the money in every effort to discover anything about anything. So, part of what sustains Alex Jones and Rush Limbaugh, may he rest in peace, and Donald Trump and others there's definitely an interest that is economic, I think, at play.
Philip's got another question in the chat box. Should a government be proactive in encouraging a free press or just neutral? Clearly, we think government should not hinder the press, but what should their role be?
That's a tough thing. If we had a free government, I think we could have a free press, but I don't think we have a free government. I think we have a government that's bought and paid for. The number one, lobbying institution in Washington is Google, or Alphabet, which owns Google. And, Facebook is close behind. And all these, there's some honest people who, are part of Congress and, are in the executive branch and are in the court system. But there are a lot of people who are not. And I think until such time as we have rules that allow us to discover what people's, to Kiao's point, financial interests are in the decisions and the laws, in the stuff, bills that they're involved in, we won't get to where we need to get. There's some super honest people, and they shouldn't all be taken down by this blanket statement. But I think that to depend on government to do the right thing when it comes to anything these days is super hard. So that's part of why I, in this book and elsewhere, refer to the power that knowledge institutions have and the public has. Until such time as, government can be, kind of, a lot of the bad actors can be filtered out, if ever that happens.
It's getting 5 o'clock, but we can continue as long as people have questions or discussion points.
I have
Just
one.
one more question.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I asked my question. If you didn't, go ahead with yours.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Anyway, let me ask you, what do you think about the cancellation of Dr. Seuss?
I love Dr. Seuss, but some of the stuff he, wrote was inelegant. I don't have a position on the I haven't read enough. I don't know enough about it. But it's hard to imagine a world with Dr. Seuss gone, and it's hard to imagine a world in which Ted Cruz, this is the world that we are living in, is reading Green Eggs and Ham to a video camera as a method of raising funds for his political party. maybe that's the ultimate, that's the ultimate absurdist moment that we've entered into. It's what we deserve.
All right, go ahead with the other question, please.
Yeah, I'm just curious, I'm sure you're asked this all the time, but in terms of high school and even grade school curriculum, do you have any suggestions as to how we might invest in students?
Yeah. I care pretty deeply about that question.
I haven't wanted to ask you because you get
I think that folks should mute if they can, because it's hard for me anyway. I don't know about you, Lawrence, but I think that there are two parts to that answer. One is, coming up with basic curricula that some kind of national commissions that are not run by closeted, self-interested groups with, unfortunate and untoward tendencies, can recommend a kind of national curriculum. We have in our country, for those school systems, state by state textbook publishing rules, and also, not just books, but resources more generally. But I think not just the materials, but the process. So teaching media literacy is key. Teaching media literacy and, processes involving how to check whether something you're reading is authentic, is verifiable, is worth continuing to read. And that curriculum, it seems like there's been a lot of work done there, but there hasn't. Print is now, 700 years old, something like that. There's more detail in here, but print is like 700 years old, and film, it's like 125, and television is like whatever it is, less than that, and the internet less than that. And we haven't done with those other media, which are so powerful, for grade schoolers and high schoolers and college students and beyond. The things that we haven't figured out what the whole verification system is for, moving images, recorded sound, as we have for print. We haven't figured out that whole verification business, verifiability business yet. Wikipedia is doing a great job. As I mentioned, Taylor Branch's book can now be linked to from a Wikipedia article on Dr. King, but can you link to the SNCC archive when you're, or truthful information about the FBI when you're watching a film about Fred Hampton? Not so easily right now, but soon, So I think there needs to be more work done on the part of educators to figure out, it's a long answer, I'm sorry, like media literacy. And I think there needs to be a commitment among people who care at all in the production universe to make sure that the things that get turned out there that are not print and that are, harder to cite or find or to cite inside of have verifiable backup information in particular, not necessarily feature films, which are fiction, but whatever the sound recordings, moving images are that we teach with.
Well, let me go back to Linda's question, which I don't know if it's quite a media answer, but people that believe lies often feel disenfranchised in some way, no? Do we address the disenfranchisements?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's true. It would be good to have somebody who believes in a lie, who feels disenfranchised on this Zoom call. There might be some, who knows, who could say exactly what they feel. It's hard to address that theoretical question. I don't know what you think. Like, maybe people who said that or believe that. Maybe we could unpack it a little bit and get into it some more. I'm sure it's true. Like, I just don't know what particular lie or person we're talking about. I'm not trying to avoid the question. I'm just trying to answer it, kind of effectively.
People with other comments, questions?
Peter, I know that the states of Texas and California have incredible a power to determine what goes into textbooks, especially in terms of history and science. And so the interpretation of history is molded a lot by the thought processes these two particular states, because they have so many schools and they have huge budgets. And so when you talk about, do you believe in evolution or, not, that ends up becoming part of the science curriculum. The interpretation of slavery, that is skewed a little bit so that the Southern point of view and justification enters into it. And it makes me think, unless you have a teacher who is willing to encourage their students to look at both sides of the picture, a lot of those textbooks are going to say this is the way it is. And so that's, I don't know, the ACLU or whoever is out there to really talk about what goes into textbooks.
I know it's super hard, right? It's like a slippery slope. On the one hand, your educational system should reflect the community values that exist around it, or in which it's based. So, but on the other hand, if those community values, enshrine, I don't know, seriously negative, maybe even, seriously negative values, we need to figure out something that's different, some resources that people could go to. I think, the people who try to suppress freedom of thought and verifiable information through time and across, government, religion, business, you name it. I come up with this term in this book, the monster verse, for them. And, I talk about the battle of free thinkers versus the monster verse. And that's convenient, it's easy because you can label somebody as part of this monster verse because they believe that, I don't know, something positive about the institution of slavery, or, something perhaps more refined within that framework that's not as obvious a ridiculous thought as that. But like, I don't know. I think they're free thinkers within all of these communities, and we have to find ways of linking up with them, making them part of the network that we create. And it's almost like, it's like, in Star Wars or in Harry Potter or in the Lord of the Rings. There are these people that are oppressing the way other people are able to grow and make progress in their lives, and we have to find ways of rescuing each other from that.
I have maybe more of a comment. It probably is a discussion point one could have for hours. But one of the pieces I see is this, the cleverness of our system. It's called the American democratic capitalist system. Is we do have a tremendous amount of freedom. And sometimes maybe we even have a little too much freedom, but conceptually, most people think, feel, and to a large degree, this is true, you can say what you want. And so I think most people feel, we got a lot of freedom here. Pretty much we can do and say and whatever we want at the most extreme end of like going into the Capitol. But, and I think this is also another piece of some of the difficulties that people think that they're free, so they're getting the truth, whatever. I don't know the whole piece, but I think it's a huge issue.
I'm with you. It's, the first talk that I gave was to a law school, the top copyright law program out of UC Berkeley. First talk I gave for this book. And the moderator says to me, after I finished my prepared remarks, so do you think we should rewrite the First Amendment? And she's like the, top copyright lawyer or whatever in the, country, whatever. And I can't, there is so much good stuff to discuss here, Lawrence, and so much good stuff that everybody wants to talk about that it feels like there should be some kind of civic place to discuss these issues more systematically than there exists today, because they really are, on the one hand, they're theoretical, but on the other hand, they're totally practical. They're affecting every part of our lives. That's what I began with. I think, if we had really good information about what was going on in the mortgage crisis before it happened, we wouldn't be, we wouldn't have fallen into that place that we fell into. And likewise, if we had challenged more aggressively, like university presidents, library heads of medical associations had stood up a little more forcefully when all this nonsense was happening exactly a year ago, who knows, maybe we would, so I think we have to figure out ways of networking ourselves and strengthening ourselves, so that when the next mortgage crisis comes around, or the next pandemic, or 20,000 people start storming the Capitol instead of the number that did, we're better prepared.
Any other questions? Absolutely must get out right now.
Peter, I don't have a question, but I do have a comment. I was fortunate enough to have a copy of your book fall into my lap, and I must say it's an excellent read. It's scholarly. You did a lot of research. I love your resources, your footnotes. It's just a pleasure to read. It's so I really compliment you on your book. It's an excellent read, and I would advise people to get a copy and just see for themselves the amount of work that you put into this book. I thank you for it. I really do. Thank you.
Well, thanks a lot, Larry. If you want to just have Dave come to, maybe record that and open the event recording with it and put it in the middle and put it at the end, that would be.
Well, see, you referred to Stephen Greenblatt in The Swerve.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite books. So I appreciated that one.
It's amazing. You lent me another one of his books that I still have, and I will confess that I need to return it to.
No, you don't. Hold on to it. So, but thank you.
You're welcome, and thanks for reading it. And the book is for sale locally. I think at Oblong has it, Peter. But don't buy just one. Yeah. Fun for the whole family. Yeah.
Shameless promotion.
I just was saying, yeah, whatever.
All right. Any other last thoughts, words, questions? Can you buy it on Amazon? I assume so, yes.
Yeah, you can. And you know what? I'll tell you the truth, that it'll soon be available online for free because I practice what I preach, and the hell with the driveway renovation, we have to do this kind of stuff. So in a couple weeks, it'll be available for complete download.
Well, thank you so much, Peter. Obviously, a lot of thought for future discussions. Maybe we can create some forum here. I don't know, but we'll talk some more anyway.
Thank you so much for hosting. Thanks, everybody, for coming.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you.
Peter, how does ping pong figure into all this?
That's a whole separate talk I'm going to give. We were chatting about it. I think the Samizdat connection.
Ping pong is the truth.
Yeah. I tell you one thing, I could use a little. That's, yeah, it's a great question.
Thanks.
That's my favorite question.
Great discussion. Thank you.
That's the only place where you can spin.
That's right. The spin zone. That's what we should, yeah.
Show us the cover of the book again. The New Enlightenment. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I think maybe I can't remember. Yeah, if you Google it, you can find it around here. Hopefully the library will have a copy. I mean, that would be.
That's not quite my department, but I'll put a good word in.
Yeah, thanks. You know people. It's part of the network, the seeding of the network that starts right now.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. It was fun, this was a good and exhausting discussion.
Well, we can't solve it all in an hour, I'm afraid.
I know, we need an hour and a half.
But we're in an hour 20, Peter, so. All right, I'm gonna close this down. I will be in touch, Peter, sooner or later.
Okay.
I like the idea of discussions, more discussions.
Can you give us 2 more minutes on this Zoom, because I have
Yeah, sure.
just 1 minute, because a friend of mine is on this call in Warsaw, or maybe, I don't know.
Please go ahead.
Warsaw.
In Warsaw, yeah.
Warsaw.
You see, I began by talking about, you remember, yeah.
Well, sure.
This is the verification agent in chief.
Okay,
for me.
No doubt now.
Yeah. All right. Well, great to see you guys. Anjay, I hope we're in touch some.
Chat for a minute or two if you want. I'm just going to move a few things around.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Mhm. All right. See you guys. Bye.
Thank you.